What's up, everybody, and welcome to Heathenology. Thank you for joining me on this first episode of what I hope to be several. My name is Heath, and that's not a coincidence that it's in the name. I thought it'd be kind of fun to have a little play on words, and Heathenology itself, if you watch the intro, you kind of got this already, but the term Heathenology comes from a couple things. Heathen is a phrase that just means someone who does not subscribe to mainstream religion. Analogy is just the study of something. So the whole point of this, the whole reason I'm doing this, is to study what it would be like to have faith and spirituality in someone's life outside of a mainstream, organized, structured, institutionalized religion. A couple cleanups things before we get started here. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and I want to tell you a little bit about what else is going on outside of this show. So first, like I said, my name is Heath. I grew up in the Midwest of the United States of America, and I grew up primarily in the Baptist Evangelical tradition. When I was 5, it was when I had my what would be called my conversion, or my moment of salvation, depending on what you believe about salvation. I was 5 and turned to my dad one day and said, I want to get saved, and the rest was history there. Nothing really happened in my spiritual life up until about the high school years, when I joined a youth group and went to some summer church camps and really started to get serious with it, and that was when I decided I wanted to be a pastor. So I went to college to get a pastoral degree and be a preacher and a pastor of a church. I was for several years, and then some other life experiences and things happened that moved me out of that course of life, you could call it, I guess. And now I spent about 12 years or so outside of all of it, just kind of wrestling with my own thoughts, my own frustrations, the things that I believed and thought were true. All of a sudden, my eyes started to get opened up and started to realize that they weren't, and I didn't really know what to do with that. And so for a long time, I stayed quiet and listened and just paid attention to what was going on. Through all of that time, culturally, we had a massive deconstruction movement where a lot of people started leaving the church. And a lot of people started talking right away, right when they were leaving the church, and that was not the path I took. I'm more of a slow down and process and then respond kind of a person. So that's why those of you, if you've been paying attention to me with the other stuff that I do for a while, like, this might seem as a shock to you. Like, what's he doing talking about this now? But this has always been kind of under the surface for me for a long time, is how do I correctly word what has been going on with me inside, with leaving Christianity and still having this concept and idea of there is something bigger and greater than us as humans. And we'll get into all of that through several of the episodes. Spoiler alert, I am not talking about a personhood of a god or anything like that, but like I said, we'll dive into that later. Anyway, that is kind of the quick rundown of what led me to where I am now. I've spent the last couple years just here and there doing some writings and things that catch my eye and things that I want to talk about, and you can find all of that on my Substack, the Heathenology.substack.com. I'll have links to all of this stuff in the show notes. But that's where I do a lot of my writings and a lot of quick blurbs and everything like that I wanted to that I just want to write about, and things that I think are important and things to pay attention to, and critiques and things that I have. There is free options. There is also subscription options. I think the monthly subscription is like $5 a month. It's super cheap. So if you are interested in helping support, more than welcome to do so. I certainly won't say no. But in the meantime, as I was doing that, I realized, I should probably do a podcast. And take some of the stuff that I'm writing and maybe explain through it a little bit thoroughly through conversation, not only with myself and monologues like this, but with other people, which is my goal, is to have several people to interview and talk through on the show. Some people are going to be, people that we might call or describe as leaders, but several might just be people that have gone through what I've gone through and have left the church for whatever reasons, whether it's pain, whether it's hurt, whether it's just, intellectually realizing this is all kind of bullshit, and we'll just have some conversations with them. So that's really the quick rundown of who I am, how I got to where I was, and what other things I have going on. So the Heathenology Substack and the podcast are a couple places where you can find the content that I make that is specific to this topic. Outside of this, I'm also a musician. I play music and I write songs up here and that. So that's fun too. If you're interested in that kind of thing, you can always search my name and find it. But like I said, the purpose of this is to focus more on the critiques and the things that happen, and like I said, the study of faith and spirituality outside of mainstream religion. So with that, let's dive in. So recently I made a post in my Substack about, it's titled The Death of American Evangelicalism. And what I did in that concept, this is a topic I'd been racking around my brain for a while, was I compared the rise of what I would call modern evangelicalism from the point of Billy Graham's ministry up through the massive endorsement that evangelicals had for Donald Trump. And right off the bat, I want to clarify this. I am not going to make this a Donald Trump bad, everything else good political post or show or anything like that. I think that people have their reasons for voting where they do, and people have their pros and cons of everyone. And I don't think one person is all evil or all bad. I think that people can do some good, even if I have massive opposition to who they are as a person and some of the actions that they take. So right off the bat, I just want to clarify that this is not an anti-Trump post. This is not a conservative or Republican or anything like that. This is going to be geared towards the responses and the things that I have seen happen in the evangelical church over the past 80 years. You could say not 80, but yeah, I love history. So what we saw, if you look back on it, is you have this man in the late 40s kind of show up named Billy Graham, and he comes at a perfect time when the media is starting to really take shape with radio and television and everything like that. And he was an insanely charismatic person. He had a great demeanor about him. He was entertaining. People started to flock to him. Now, one of the things that Billy Graham did in his messages, he did a couple things that I think are important to point out. One, he did not get controversial. He did later, but right at the beginning, he stayed pretty on the fence on a lot of these social issues of the time. And he did that on purpose because it's easy to gather people to follow you if both teams think you're on their side. So he stayed blank with any of those social issues of the time on purpose, so that he could grow and expand and build his revivals and his ministry. The other thing that he did was simplify the message. He put the message of the gospel, you could say, into clear, precise understanding that resonated with a lot of people. It's I would argue that that's where you really get the start of what's called bumper sticker doctrine. He starts to simplify things, make things quick and pithy and easy to repeat. And you start to see that as time goes on, evolve into the bumper stickers that get thrown on cars, the phrases that you hear these celebrity preachers today and even 10, 20, 30 years ago start to say. And they talk about making things pretty simple. And that, I mean, if you've never heard a Joel Osteen sermon, it's all that. It's all simple, good, feel good slogans and phrases that you could repeat. And now that's an example, I would say, of someone who took it to an extreme. But for the most part, you see that in a lot of churches as time has progressed from the 40s up till now. So he did those things, and it allowed him to expand and grow and become, the person that we talk about today. I think at one point he was preaching to crowds of millions of people. So to say that he was arguably one of the first, if not the first, really big celebrity preacher would be an understatement. People came everywhere to hear him, people came everywhere to see him, and he knew how to use the tools of his time to expand and grow. So he's got this massive following, and what happened is, as evangelicalism progressed throughout the next several decades, people saw this and they realized this, and they began to try to model it and piggyback off of his success. They would use his phrases in their sermons. They would use references to him in their sermons, and they would go through it. And as such, you get this giant movement of evangelicalism that is centered on growing and building crowds and keeping messages very, very simple. And what I think that did was really damage what could have been, I don't know if I want to say a force for good, because I think that religion as a whole doesn't really fall into that category. And we, real quick, I throughout history, like you can point to what's caused the most pain and most deaths, and religion's up there on the list, if not the top of that list. But getting back to this story, I think you've got this sense of people started to model these things, and whatever Christianity was supposed to be became co-opted and veered left, and started to become this thing that could be used to build specific brands for specific churches, and even deeper into that, specific preachers. The whole model of Christianity became that of really corporate America. We build the church, we have to have the infinite growth model, and just keep growing and keep growing and keep growing, no matter how big or small your town or city was. And it just kept happening, and the bigger they grew, the more that the preacher became known and became kind of celebritized. And they started writing their own books, started having bookstores in their churches, and selling their brand and selling their model. You get the Rick Warrens with the Purpose-Driven Life. You get all of these other preachers and pastors that start to model this brand mode of Christianity. How do I build, what they would say is, how do I build the church? But really what it was, if you look back on it, is how do I build this business that I am now the CEO of? Well, that doesn't really fit well with spirituality. Corporations are geared towards one thing, profit and growth, two things, but they kind of go hand in hand. And so when that becomes your mode, things start to get watered down rather quickly so that you can reach the most people, and things start to get, what's the word I'm looking for? Things start to get celebritized so that you can get the most people interested in your church. When I was in the thick of it all, the big ones at the time for me, you had the Mark Driscoll out in Seattle, and of course that was a fantastical fall. Rob Bell was a big one that I was interested in and a part of as well. John Piper was big. So that was kind of the era that I was really, in my youth and in college and high school, and really in the thick of it. But we'll talk through some of the falls and why I think that has happened. But to stay on story here, you see this start to happen where brands start to get built and people start to focus more on how do we build this specific church. And what happens then is the churches that don't follow this model or can't because they don't have leadership that are interested in this, maybe they're an aging congregation or whatever the case may be, start to become prey for churches like this. And they start to cannibalize off of each other in their own towns. So what happens is then you have this fake perception of growth. You're not actually converting people to Christianity. You're not actually, quote, saving people and turning them to Jesus followers or whatever you want to call it. What you're doing is you're just siphoning off congregations from other churches and moving them all into yours. And you see this happen with the big church plant movement. This was a big thing that happened. People would start a church and they would come because they could either get a higher position and start right away, or they could do things their own way, or they didn't like something that was said one Sunday, so they jump and they start a new church, and it just got crazy there for a while. But this all happened, and then on top of all that, you started to see the rise of, like I said, more and more books being published and written by pastors. You had TV shows, radio shows, and the big one that came out, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, podcasts. Churches started to record their sermons, post them as podcasts. Pastors started to have their own sermons, their own blogs, their own things that people could follow and basically get content from their leader. And you see all of that happen is just another way of using the media to your advantage to grow what you're trying to grow. And all of that stems back to the models that Billy Graham did and used. Now, as I wrote this post, and the reason I'm talking about it today is, I had a comment on there about, the media sought out Billy Graham. He didn't seek out the media. And that's fair. But you also have to understand that the media does what it does. It looks for interesting things and entertaining things. Billy Graham met that criteria. So sure, in that aspect, you could say that the media sought him out and they corrupted him, or whatever, every word you want to say. But I don't think that's the whole story. I think Billy Graham also saw how he could use the media to build and grow and expand his reach. Reach the entire world with the message of Jesus, right? Well, if you've got a way to record a message and spread it out on the airwaves globally, internationally, and nationally, like, why would you not do that? So there was a relationship between both of them, the media and Billy Graham, that was mutually beneficial, you could say, and they both knew how to operate it and knew how to use each other to their advantages. So all of that to really get to, that's kind of the background of where I see what happens. And then you see with all of these churches following these models of infinite growth, siphoning out from other churches, keeping messages really simple, keeping things very quick, keeping things very surface level, really, and diving into, spirituality and things that could be talked about. You all of a sudden have this couple generations of followers that all of a sudden no longer really know what's in the Bible. They have the simple stories, and they have the simple phrases. The Prayer of Jabez was a big fucking book at the time, as well. And you get these crazy little things that happen, and they start to get superficial themselves. They're basically, diving in ankle deep on a tradition and teachings and stories that are thousands of years old, and likely don't mean what we think they mean today. And they just follow the next cool catchphrase. The biggest sticker I've been seeing a lot on cars today is it says he, and then it's the greater than sign, and then it's I. And again, that's just it's another example of watering something down and making it simple and in my opinion, kind of lame. But when you have a couple generations that's all they know is this simplistic, catchphrasey faith, what this does is it primes them up to follow things like this, because they see that as the extent of spirituality and the extent of, you could say, the extent of leadership. It's how do you distill things down to get people to follow you and get the big aha moments, or whatever the case may be. And what I think what happened is one of the reasons we saw the evangelical church massively endorse Donald Trump, despite his clear oppositional characteristics of what evangelicalism is supposed to stand for, or at least what they claim to stand for. I think one of the reasons that they did is because he did all of these things as well. He was entertaining, he kept his messages simple, he even had catchy catchphrases, make America great again. He followed that exact model that these people have been primed for years to, swallow and take in and see as, this makes sense to me because this feels like, what I'm getting on Sunday mornings. So the evangelical church that endorses him and goes in behind him, and not even just the leaders, but even the people that claim to be Christians, claim to follow this person of Jesus, threw their hats in with a man who is the opposite of all of that. He's a crook, he's a thief, he's a liar, he's all those different things, and we know it, but man, if you say it, they sure come after you, and have some interesting things to say. So I think what happened is you have this primed base who has spent decades hearing messages like this, simple, quick, slogany, and make me laugh and entertain me. I mean, some of the stuff he said in his debates and that was hilarious. I'm not gonna lie. Calling women fat and saying only Rosie O'Donnell. That's hilarious. I'm sorry. It's super funny. But it's not necessarily the type of character that you would think evangelicals and the church would want. But I think when you have generations of people who aren't really taught how to think critically about things, they're taught to just, hey, who are we doing? Who are we following now? What are they saying? Who is my pastor telling me to follow? And everything like that. You have these group of people that don't really think. They just kind of go with the next big thing that's catchy and entertaining and everything like that. And that, I think you saw that happen with the endorsement of Donald Trump. Now, I'll say this as a caveat. Voting for him doesn't necessarily mean endorsing. Those are two different things, in my opinion. I think people vote based on the options that they have in front of them. That's obviously, or they don't vote. They abstain, or whatever the case may be, and that's fine. And you can vote for someone who you don't agree with because you think that they would be the better candidate than the person that they are running against. And a lot of people did that with Donald Trump. So this, I'm not ignoring that at all. But the evangelical church as a whole didn't just vote for him. They full-on endorsed him. called him their guy, called him God's man. There were several people that said he's the the savior, the next coming of Jesus, and there was those are crazy loons, but it was said. And so I think you have to recognize that distinction, that voting and endorsing are two different things. What I'm talking about is the massive endorsement that happened from the evangelical church to a man like Donald Trump. I think what happened is you have this person of Billy Graham lead a bunch of people and change the way that the gospel message is presented. And what it did over the years is it distilled down the level of critique and thought, and the skill of critique and thought that was in the congregations, to the point where someone like Donald Trump comes along and they never stood a chance. He met all the criteria without having the character to back it up, but the character no longer mattered anymore. It's what are you saying? And that's another clear example of that is in a person like Joel Osteen. And there's several others that we could talk through, and we probably will over time. But you have that happens. And it leads them right into him. So I think that is kind of where I was going at with that post, was you have this progression of, Billy Graham, without knowing it, even leads the sheep right into the hands of the wolf, you could say, over the next 80 years, and they fell into it hook, line, and sinker. The other thing that I talked about in the post, and that I'll end with this, is for those of us who have left and who have deconstructed, you've got this dangerous thing that happens is we become frustrated, we become hurt, we become resentful, and we leave the church because our critical thinking helped us see things that a lot of other people can't or haven't yet. Let me word it that way. But what happens is we become extremely vulnerable when we leave. And because we have spent a lot of our lives in that type of culture of, finding the next catchphrase, what's the next cool movement, what's the next thing, we have a tendency to jump teams and not actually leave religion. You can find yourself holding on to that pain and that anger and that frustrations that happen with the church, and just purposely doing whatever is the opposite of that because you're angry. And I did that for a long time, did that for years. And the reason I did that was because I hadn't fully healed yet from what had happened to me within the church, and I needed to. And there was things that I said and did that, looking back on it, were not correct and stupid and foolish and young. But again, like when you're in that moment, you're extremely vulnerable. So what happens is as we leave, we have the tendency to jump ship and, like I said, do the exact opposite of the church. And in many ways, we never really deconstructed. We just jumped to another religion. And what happens is especially today, is a lot of us see progressive culture as the opposite of Christianity. So we jump into it, and what progressive culture can become, and we got to be careful of this, is it can become another religion in and of itself. And in that case, you didn't actually leave religion, you just changed religions. And your critical thinking is all focused, its energy is all focused towards Christianity and evangelicalism, when it really needs to do is expand and open up and realize, like, oh, there are a lot of movements and people out there that are trying to get me to follow them. And if I'm not careful, if I'm not paying attention, I am vulnerable to the point that I could fall into the same traps that I fell into in Christianity, just with the characters and names changed. some great examples that I've seen is some of the stuff that's happened with the the cancel culture and the woke movement and everything like that. It's got its own excommunications. If you say the wrong thing, you're out. It's got its own doctrine. You have to believe and say these things, or you're not a part of us. I mean, these are all things that Christianity did to me, and if you challenge them or question them or were curious about them, they would get very upset. I had a friend that got kicked out of church because she asked about the authenticity of Noah's Ark. And she kept asking questions, and they finally told her, I don't think this is a good fit. The same thing happens to, people that I have seen and friends that I have known who ask really good questions when it comes to some of the stuff happening in the culture today. And they get kicked out, they get destroyed on social media, and it's the same type of concept. So you've got to recognize that leaving religion doesn't necessarily mean that you just, I've left Christianity or whatever religion you find yourself in. You also have to recognize that religions can disguise themselves as anything. And anyone that's trying to get people to follow them and help them build their brand in a sense of a case has the capability of becoming your new religion. And you might not even realize it. So with what happened with Billy Graham up through the last several decades, and with those of us that were in the church for a very long time, we've got to recognize that vulnerability in our thought processes, that we, until we fully think through and process things in our deconstruction process, we can become vulnerable to savior complexes and people who claim to be the answer and follow, especially if they're charismatic and they know what to say and they have the right words to say, and they just people are really gravitating towards them. It's easy for us to do the same because it's all we've known, and we can jump into those old habits without even thinking about it. And all of that to say, I think we have Billy Graham to thank for that. So I'm going to leave that there. If you want to read the rest of the post, like I said, it is on the Heathenology Substack, and I'll have the link to it and everything in here in the show notes. I do again want to thank you for checking out this episode. The first of, the first of many. I figured I'd start with a doozy and dive in some more stuff later. But this was one I had wanted to talk about for the past several years, and I really wanted to flesh out, and I'm probably still fleshing out the entirety of it. So you're catching this in its development. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your comments and things that maybe I didn't think about, or maybe some things you think, I'm completely off on. I love hearing that because I'm certainly not right about a lot. So with that, thanks again. My name is Heath. I appreciate you tuning in and checking this out. And heathens, we'll see you next time.